Hello, everyone. It's my honor and pleasure to introduce our today's speaker, Shigeru Miyagawa of MIT and the University of São Paulo. Shigeru is one of the most eminent in general and Japanese linguistics, and one of the most renowned syntacticians. His work focuses on foundational issues in the theory of syntax, like movement, scrambling, agreement case, as well as on a lot of specific topics, including positives, quantifiers, restructuring, unequal argument structure, islandhood, light verbs. It's just impossible to list everything Shigeru has worked on. More recently, he has done a lot of amazing work on the evolution of language. He and his colleagues proposed what is now known as integration hypothesis, which relies on the idea that the crucial role of language is to link the two systems we find not just in humans, but also in the animal world. An expression system found, for example, in birdsong, and the lexical system found in non-human primates. In 2022, Shigeru published his most recent book, Syntax in the Treetops, in which he explores what happens at the highest level of syntactic structure and argues that this level is basically designed to represent information related to speech acts and their participants. And as far as I can see, Shigeru's today talk will focus on issues related to this exciting area of inquiry. And I would also like to mention two other areas, two non-linguistic areas where Shigeru's contribution was, I believe, absolutely crucial. One is his involvement in different initiatives related to digital learning, including MIT Open Courseware initiative, which many of us are familiar with. And the other is amazing visualizing culture project, in which Shigeru has invested a lot of his time, effort, and dedication. So Shigeru, we are enormously pleased to have you here today. Welcome.
Thank you, Sergey. Thank you so much for that very kind introduction. So nice to see all of you. It's wonderful that nowadays with this Zoom, I get to interact with people from all over the world, as I am doing this morning. And I am very pleased that I can speak with you. I'll try to keep my talk to about 40 minutes, maybe a little bit less if I can, so that we'll have chance to have a conversation. So as Sergey said, I'm a professor at MIT. I have been at MIT now for a long time. You can tell by the rocking chair behind me. MIT gives you the rocking chair after 25 years of work. And so you can tell that I've been here at least 25 years. It's actually a little bit more than 30 years. As soon as I got the rocking chair, I sat in it. It's actually not that comfortable. I think that that's a message that, you know, you have to keep working and you can't relax and rock away. But it's a very nice piece of furniture, a very nice piece of prop for my room to do my Zoom. So let me share the screen. Okay, so as Sergey kindly mentioned, today's talk is an extension of the work I did in my 2022 linguistic inquiry monograph from MIT Press, which was the third in a series investigating certain properties of human language, which I call strong uniformity, which is something that I proposed in my 2010 monograph, Why Agree, Why Move, and there the question was, what is universal about human language? Prior to minimalism, we had a very nice picture of what language universality looks like. There was a bunch of principles which are supposed to be universal, like binding theory, head parameter, subjacency, and the idea was that all human languages share the same stock of these principles. That was the universal part. The variation came from parameters that were built into these principles. For example, the head parameter, it could be head initial or head final. So it was a very beautiful view of human language and its universality. But it was decided quite quickly that these principles really did not have any reality per se. And so they were set aside for minimalism, which by its name says we're going to make minimal assumptions about what underlies human language and try to figure out from there how human language works. And that is a real advance in science. But now the question becomes, what is the statement of universality? And Chomsky had this uniformity principle in his 2001 article, in which he said that assume all languages to be uniform, and variations are things that you can actually perceive. It was a very abstract statement, and I actually could not see how I could take that statement and apply it to research. And so what I tried to do in my 2010 LI monograph was to take a small domain of human language, grammatical features, and do something like what we did in GB, but in the spirit of minimalism. And I said that all grammatical features are shared by human languages. Okay, the same stock of grammatical features, and that's the universal part. And the variation comes from how those grammatical features show up in the syntactic structure. They all start out at C, or maybe small v, and some stay there, others get inherited to T. And depending on the configuration that you end up with English-like language, Japanese-like language, Dinka-like language, Spanish-like language. And that was the work I did in my 2017 monograph. But the problem that was pointed out right away is, if it's the case that all languages share grammatical features, the same set of grammatical features, what about languages like Japanese and Korean and Indonesian that don't have 5-feature agreement? And no, that's a very, very valid argument. And so I spent some time trying to look for 5-feature agreement in agreementless languages like Japanese. And I think I found that. It's what I call allocutive agreement, and which I'll show you today. And if it turns out to be the case, then we can hold on to the strong uniformity principle that all human languages share the same stock of grammatical features. Okay, but today I'd like to get into that research from a very different perspective, and that is that what is human language designed for? And so let me start with that. So there's this competing view of the nature of language. There's a long-standing debate about what language is designed for. Scholars such as Tomasello emphasize its social use of communication. Chomsky, Hinzen, and others characterize it as representing human thought, and its use as communication tool is strictly secondary. So this is actually a split that Chomsky himself made back in 1965 when he talked about performance and competence. The human language has both, but it's competence that we want to try to analyze performance, which is the use of language in, let's say, communication, is way too complex. It involves many other things aside from language competence, such as memory, social rules, and so forth. So Chomsky is holding to his competence performance bifurcation and say we look at competence. Whereas people like Tomasello say, no, language is really about performance. And my argument is that it's actually both. That recent development in extending syntax to interface with discourse makes it possible to unify these two views of language. So the idea of social use versus let's say representing human thought also shows up in another bifurcation, that's formalism versus functionalism. Formalism, what are the principles underlying the structure of language? Language emerges from a biologically endowed linguistic capacity. It is autonomous and independent of other cognitive abilities. It is structure-based. Language is primarily an instrument of thought, audible thinking, as Chomsky says. So this is Chomsky's competence. And this is what generative grammar has dealt with from the 1950s, from the standard theory to extended standard theory to GB theory and now minimalism. Okay, this is what we look at. But people like Tomasello say, no. Language has to do with function. That language is social behavior. Its structures are social conventions. Its functions are all derived in one way or another from communication. It can be acquired only through social interaction with other human beings. A language is composed of conventional symbols shaped by other social communicative functions. In the acquisition process, students rely on cultural learning skills, imitative learning, for example. These skills emanate from their ability to participate intersubjectively with adults in cultural activities. Okay, very familiar to those who are familiar with this functional view of language. Okay? And the two camps have drawn a very bold and thick line between the camps, and basically criticize the other camp for not really understanding what human language is. And my idea is that really it's both, and both are right. And if you look at biologists, what they say, they say, it's both. Biology, if you look at biological systems, it's both. S.J. Gould, the famous biologist, suggests that formalism and functionalism represent poles of a timeless dichotomy, each expressing a valid way of representing reality. Both poles can only be regarded as deeply right, and each needs the other because the full axis of the dichotomy operates as a lens thrown through and then anchoring the empirical world. If one pole wins for contingent reasons of a transient historical moment, then the advantage can only be temporary and intellectually limited. Okay? That's a very powerful statement by an eminent biologist. If you look at any biological system, if you look at the brain, you know that it's both formal in that you can represent the biological so the resource that forms a brain, but it's also functional in that brain forms in interacting with the environment. And so what I want to do is to take this Gould idea and say function and formalism, social use and competence must be brought together if we're going to have a true theory of human language. Unlike before, where the two camps have separated themselves into two different domains of scholarship. And the way I propose to do this is by using recent theory, which some people call syntacticization of discourse. and what I call treetop structure of syntax. The idea being that syntax has two domains. Here, what I call the expressive domain and the propositional domain. The expressive domain, SAP, that's speaker addressee phrase, and then commitment phrase, which I'm not going to talk about today. But the speaker addressee phrase takes the expression and anchors it in the conversational context, speaker and addressee. And this is the locus of elocutionary force. In order to perform an elocutionary act, you typically need a speaker and addressee. And so syntax right at the top, right at the treetop, has created this speaker addressee phrase. At the bottom is the propositional component, the C system. This is what we have been studying mostly. This is the part that we think of as competence, the C system. This is where you find the typical linguistic operations like merge and scope taking, truth conditions, all of the familiar things that we learn from studying syntax and semantics. Okay? A lot of people have been working on this extended treetop structure, as you can see. So if we can show that syntax is not just the propositional component, the competence component, but it also extends into the expressive component, then we are able to begin to combine the two views of human language as be both function and competence, or representational, okay, with functional and formal, in the way that the biologist Gould encourages us to try to do. Okay, so now I want to go right into the data to motivate the speaker addressee phrase. So yeah, that's the social use, and that's representing thought. Okay, so I'm going to give evidence for the treetop structure. I'm going to talk about evidence from my work and others, having to do with things like allocative agreement. And then I'm going to, at the end, introduce something new that I have been looking at, home signs, which are sign languages that are spontaneously created by congenitally deaf children who are born to hearing parents, and therefore they don't have any linguistic input, and they create their own signs. And it's just a remarkable system that we are seeing. Let me then begin with a treetop structure evidence. Sort of now a classic argument for the occurrence of the SAP, and particularly the addressee projection in the treetop, has to do with allocative agreement. And the most dramatic evidence for this comes from a dialect of Basque, Solothurn Basque, which is spoken in southern France. And this was analyzed by Oyas about 1993. And I picked it up and gave further analysis in my 2012 article. So if you look at Solothurn Basque, you can see the left column that it conjugates just as you would expect any language, any language with agreement. So Noa is first person, I am going, Doa is third person singular, Goaz is first person plural, and Doaz is third person plural. Okay? What is remarkable about this language, this dialect of Basque, is that along with the subject agreement, you get a second agreement. You can see in the middle column, you have this K on top of the subject agreement, and the K is second person masculine colloquial. And on the right side, you have this N, Noan. N is second person feminine colloquial. So the middle column K is used if you are telling a male friend that I am going, or that he's going, or we're going, or they're going. You use the N if you're telling a female friend that I am going, he's going, we're going, they're going. Okay? So these are second person agreement markers that agree with the addressee, okay? Male, female, and friend in this case. Okay? And this is called allocutive agreement. And Oyasawa showed that this allocutive agreement occurs very high in the structure. And I have extended that idea to show that it actually is evidence for the addressee projection in the tree structure. Okay? This is the same point now using the example, Peter worked, A, B, C, D. They all mean Peter worked, Peter worked, Peter worked, Peter worked. Basque is an ergative language, so you get ergative agreement, singular, third person, to agree with Peter. And that's true all the way through, because it's the same sentence, Peter worked. But along with that, you get this allocutive agreement that varies. In the first case, you have this K, which we saw is second person masculine. So you use Dick to say Peter worked to a male friend. N is second person feminine and colloquial. So you use this to tell a female friend that Peter worked. This Z is colloquial, second person. You would use this to tell someone higher in status that Peter worked. In the case of D, where you have plural addressee, you're telling a bunch of people that Peter worked, there is no allocutive agreement, because allocutive agreement only comes in singular form. So you can see this quite dramatic illustration of addressee projection licensing, an agreement, second person agreement, where there is no second person agreement. Oyasawa gives lots of arguments to show that this allocutive agreement is just regular 5-feature agreement. Okay? It takes the form of second person, although there is no second person in the sentence, as you can see in this example. It also competes with the regular intrasentential agreement. So in Basque, and this is true for all of Basque, within a sentence, Basque agrees with all arguments. So there's an agreement for subject, there's an agreement for object, there's an agreement for indirect object if you have a ditransitive verb. If you have a second person argument, let's say you will come, then you cannot have the allocutive agreement, which is also second person. Okay? So allocutive agreement competes with regular intrasentential agreement, showing that it is part of the regular standard agreement system. And so this is right. This is agreement, 5-feature agreement, which we're familiar with. It just so happens that it occurs very high in the structure, and it is licensed by this projection of addressee in the treetops. So that's for addressee. For the speaker projection, we have really nice evidence from Romanian. This is Virginia Hill, who I have been working with. Romanian has these sentential particles that occur usually sentence initially. This is high, and it gives a sort of an emotional sense to the sentence. So in 4, I messed it up again, and this high gives this idea of damn or right. Okay? And as you can see, it occurs very high in the structure. It occurs higher than the complementizer. And Virginia argues that this high actually occurs on the head of the speaker projection at the very top of the treetop. And interestingly, this high can also conjugate for agreement. So here, haidem is conjugated for first person plural. showing that this is being licensed by a first person, and as Hill argues, this is being licensed by the speaker at the very top. So lots of data like this from Romanian for showing both the speaker projection and also the addressee projection. So I talked about strong uniformity. The languages share the same set of grammatical features, and these are overtly manifested. And so what to do with five-feature agreement? In languages such as Japanese, it is manifested as allocutive agreement, which is second person. And as I argued, actually taking a hint from something that Oyasabal mentioned in his article on Basque, right at the end of that article, Oyasabal mentions that the allocutive agreement in Solothurn Basque has the same function and distribution as Japanese politeness marker mas. And he was referring to an old paper, old Eli Squibb of mine. So I picked that up and show that in fact in Japanese there is a five-feature agreement that begins as C, and it is ultimately licensed by the addressee, which is the allocutive agreement. So let me show you the Japanese data. This is what I have been working on for some time now, along with Basque and Romanian. So in Japanese, there is this marking mas, which is to show that that you're being polite to the speaker. Okay? So it's very much like allocative agreement. Without the mas, you would say Hanako ate to a friend. Okay? There's, I give lots of evidence that this is allocative agreement. The thing that people have pointed out that is a problem for this analysis is that mas occurs very low in the structure. And you can see that in 7, mas, which is allocative agreement licensed by addressee, very high in the structure, in the treetops, occurs below tense. Yeah? And in 8, it shows that it occurs even below negation, tabe masen. Okay? That's very low in the structure. It's below T, although it is supposedly being licensed by this addressee way up in the treetop structure. And so this has been a criticism, quite correct criticism by people who read my 2017 Eli monograph. So I had to go and write a whole new monograph, 2022 monograph, to address this. And so why does the politeness marker must occur so low in the structure when it should be licensed as an allocative agreement by the addressee projection in the treetop? The reason has to do with a historical, almost an accident. It used to be that mas was an object agreement, object honorific. And so, it makes sense that if it's object honorific, it would occur around the small VP domain. And for historical reasons, it just got stuck there because there's no place in modern Japanese syntax where mas can occur at the end of the sentence. Okay? So it occurs low, but there is actually quite striking evidence that allocative agreement actually races into the treetops. And the evidence comes from Yamada's 2019 Georgetown PhD dissertation, which I extended. And the data here is, I'll show you. The idea is that mas occurs very low in the structure because of for this historical reason, but the allocative 5 feature actually raises all the way up to C, and in fact above. But I'll show you the evidence for this raising up to C, and it has to do with quite striking sequential allomorphy that you find in Japanese. So 10 and 11 both mean didn't the package arrive? 10 is colloquial, so there is no mas. So you have arrive, negation, arrive, negation, and past tense, and interjection, and then the Q particle, right? And 11 is the formal counterpart because you have mas. And what you find is that as soon as you stick in mas, everything begins to change above that. So the negation, the colloquial is na, but in the polite form is en. Past tense in the colloquial is ta, but in the mas form is deshita. And in the colloquial form, the introduction is daro, but in the polite form is desho. Okay, so just inserting mas at the bottom triggers this quite amazing sequential anamorphy of negation, the past tense, and interjection. Okay. Negation, this n that you see in the mas version, this is the only place in standard Japanese where negation is pronounced as n. Everywhere else is pronounced as na. Okay. So that is an anamorph of negation triggered by the occurrence of mas. Okay. So what I suggest is that, okay, so yeah, so you have na if it's colloquial, and as I will show, if it's negation plus allocutive agreement, ta if it's past tense colloquial, deshita if it's past tense plus allocutive agreement, daro if it's just the colloquial, but desho if it's introduction plus allocutive agreement. Okay. So basically what's happening is that you have allocutive 5 feature that starts out with mas low in the structure, but it has to go up to find its a goal, the addressee in the treetops. So it keeps going up to negation, to T, to modifier. And I have separate arguments for C, and I have separate argument for it moving, in fact, into the treetop structure. But just this idea of sequential anamorphy, I don't think I've ever seen data like this in any language. And the data, it's not at all controversial data. It's just very straightforward data of this sequential anamorphy triggered by just the occurrence of mas. Okay. So that shows that mas is allocutive agreement. For historical reason, it occurs low in the structure, but it introduces this allocutive 5 feature, which then has to go up the tree to find its goal, the addressee in the treetop structure. I'm going to skip the commitment phrase for today. I have a new article coming out in LI with Virginia Hill that talks about the commitment phrase. So if you have any questions about that, I'll be happy to talk about it. Okay. So the evidence for the allocutive feature in Japanese and in Basque, and the evidence for the speaker projection from languages like Romanian show that there is this treetop structure and its syntax. See, that's the important part. It's syntax, because the treetop structure controls agreement, grammatical agreement, 5 feature agreement. Okay? So syntax is not just the propositional extended C component, the formal part, but it also extends to the treetop structure, which allows you to anchor the whole structure in the conversational context. So language is designed both for function and representation. Okay? social usage, if you like Tomasello's term, and also representing human thought, the C system, as Chomsky and Hinzen and others have said. Okay. So this is my suggestion that we can begin to combine the two as Gould, the biologist, suggests. Let me then finish the talk by telling you a little bit about a new research that I have been doing on home science. We're finishing up the paper. You can see a whole bunch of people. This is part of my Sao Paulo Excellence Chair project based in at University of Sao Paulo that involves biologists, geneticists, primatologists, and linguists. And this part has to do with home science. So let me show you. The idea, as you saw, that syntax extends to treetop structure that allows you to anchor the C system in conversation. Yeah. So start with language acquisition. Assumption is that infants must be exposed to language early. And this is based in part on rare and unfortunate cases of children who are linguistically deprived until late in childhood. The French feral child who was found in the forest at the age of 9, and French physician that attempted to teach him language, but other than few words, the child was unable to fully learn language. Jeannie, well documented, completely isolated from society for the first 13 years of her life by her father. Attempts were made to teach her language, and although she was able to acquire a large set of vocabulary, she never acquired grammatical knowledge. A very unfortunate case. So these kinds of case studies have led linguists and psychologists to assume that in order to acquire human language, you have to be exposed to language early in life. During what's called critical period. So the critical period, so there's a window in brain development when a child learns language with ease, a period that lasts until around puberty or a bit later. But once that window closes, much more effort is needed to acquire language. Critical periods involve biological mechanisms in which molecular triggers change neural circuits from a premature state, which cannot be systematically changed, to a state of plasticity that allows input to structure and restructure the circuit for learning. This onset of plasticity triggered by external input is led by the maturation of neural circuits that utilize the neurotransmitter gamma aminobutyric acid, or GABA. Once the critical period opens up, experience can lead to significant changes in wiring of the brain circuit. And at the end of the critical period, or the critical period is brought about by other chemical changes that occur in the brain that sort of solidifies the changes that were made during periods of plasticity. A lot of the work is being done by Takao Hench next door at Harvard. And it's quite amazing, just quite amazing work that's being done on critical periods. Sorry. Okay, so there are 3 theories of language acquisition, and we're going to challenge each and every one of these. So the behavioral model is the Skinner model. Early exposure to the target language is critical for providing a model by which children imitate their caregivers. This is the pure behaviorist model. The nativist theory, Chomsky, Pinker, and others, early exposure activates a biologically endowed capacity for language that forms the foundation for acquisition of any language, commonly called universal grammar. Interactional theory, Brunner, Tomasello, considers interaction with caregivers and others around the child early in life to be the essential factor in language acquisition. Okay? So, you have to pick one right now. And what we'll show is that, in fact, you cannot pick one. Sign language. Among the approximately 7,000 languages of the world listed in Ethnologue, 150 are sign languages, including American Sign Language, Czech Sign Language, and so forth. Okay? ASL, American Sign Language, has as many as 500,000 users. So it's a major language. And now we get into home signs. Unlike a fully developed sign language, home signs emerge spontaneously from individuals who have no other way to communicate. Scholars have studied home signs in many parts of the world, including US, China, Nicaragua, and Israel. A pioneer of this study, Susan Golden Meadows, says, our challenge is to discover the forces that shape gesture creation in deaf children. For these are the forces that are likely to play a role in language creation every time it takes place. So 90% of deaf children, this is around the world, are born to parents who aren't deaf. And the parents, in their determined attempts to communicate, use hand gestures that are chaotic and not in any way resembling the orderly system found in language. What Golden Meadow noticed right away was the deaf child creates signs to communicate, but unlike their parents' futile attempts, the signs of the child resemble regular language in a variety of ways. Unlike the parents' signs, which change in form chaotically from context to context, the signs that the children create are stable and don't change from situation to situation, very much like words in a language. Okay? No one taught them to do this. They simply started to do this on their own, tapping the inner resources. Some properties of home signs, these spontaneous systems, the gestures are often made up of small parts that can be combined in new ways to produce gestures with new meanings, which are predictable from its parts. This is called compositionality and is typical of morphology in spoken language, such as the prefix re, which can combine with verbs to create the meaning of doing something again, redo, so forth. This kind of combining of parts to form a unit with a new meaning is only found in human language. And the fact that home signs exhibited suggests that these signs are based on the same capacity that underlies spoken and fully developed sign languages. Parts of speech. Gestures have parts of speech. Again, these are just spontaneously made gestures, such as nouns and verbs. For example, the gesture for twist, using the iconic motion, may be made while moving it towards the jar, indicating the action of twisting. This is the verb, compared to a verb. While moving, there may be several motions of twisting. The same gesture can be made in a neutral position without moving its location and with just one twist, indicating a noun with this meaning. Okay, so you have parts of speech, again, spontaneous. Displacement. The children also display what Hackett called displacement in his 1960 Scientific American article. This is the ability to talk about entities and situations not in the immediate conversational context, either spatially or temporally. Human language, we do that all day long. A home signer in Golden Meadows' study invented a sign that functions to indicate displacement both spatially and temporally. Okay? The signer held his hand vertically near the chest with the palm out and making an arching motion away from the body, indicating spatial or temporal displacement. Recursion. From Golden Meadow, Marvin, who was the home signer, produces following gesture sentence to tell his mother that he had just blown a bubble, that's propositional one, and then the bubble went forward in the air. So blow, go, forward. You have sentential complementation, recursion. As another example, David produces the following sentence to request his mother to twist open the jar, proposition 1, blow a bubble, proposition 2, so that he can clap. Then recursion. So we have been looking at a home sign in northern Brazil. And what is really unique about Senna is the name of the home sign, is that we know every signer from its inception. Okay? The first home signer, Senna, was born about 70 years ago. And we have very good documentation by people who observed how this came about. And today there are 34 Senna signers in this community. That is the totality of the Senna speaking community. And they have been pretty much isolated. Isolated from Libras, which is the national sign language. And we know from the documentation that today's Senna signers are using signs pretty much like the signs that were originally invented by the original Senna signer. And so by studying their signs, we can begin to see, what the system is like. And we have already identified all of the properties that Golden Meadows identified, which makes Senna, which gives Senna, essential properties of human language. Things like compositionality. They're able to combine signs and form new signs. They have displacement. They have parts of speech. They have recursion. Yeah? We're also looking at other things like two elements which are separated in syntax, but are construed together, things like that. And so we are very confident that the Senna is, first of all, it is exactly the language system that was invented initially by this first Senna signer, and second, that it has essential properties of human language. What is really amazing to think about is that from looking at Senna, we can see that both interactional and native theories are correct. Okay? Initially, intense interactions with caregivers trigger use of the linguistic capacity. This is in absence of linguistic input. Okay? The important point about Senna and all home signs is that there is no linguistic input. Parents don't know sign language. They're doing this very random, chaotic behavior to try to interact with the kids. But there is no linguistic input. Okay? And yet the children acquire a system with essential properties of human language. It's like magic. Okay? What is produced is recognizable linguistic elements apparently shaped by the biologically endowed linguistic capacity. So what, as final point, what we think is happening with home sign is that interaction through this, at the top of the tree structure, interaction is critical. And that triggers this entire linguistic system, including the C system, to which the kids had no input whatsoever. But by this interaction, the whole structure here was triggered. And the C system particularly brought the resources of things like compositionality, recursion, displacement, all of the things that we think of as language without any input from surroundings that is linguistic. So the interaction triggered this whole system, And what was triggered was the linguistic system, the SIS system that gives Sena and other home signs properties of human language. Okay? And so if this is correct, then this is another argument that there is this SAP critical to the entire syntactic structure. In the case of home sign, it actually triggers the entire system without any input for any linguistic input. Okay, so that's what I wanted to talk to you about, and I'll be happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Shigeru. Thank you so very much. That's very exciting. And I guess there will be quite a number of questions from the audience. So we have two ways of asking questions. One is raising your hand, and the other is writing it down in chat. So any questions, comments, suggestions? Andrei Kivik, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Miyagawa, for your talk. And my question is this. Since you said that in the case of Sena, there was no linguistic input from the parents, so why didn't those feral children who grew up in the woods, why didn't they develop language?
You're talking about, yes, because they didn't have any interaction with humans.
Mm-hmm.
That was what was missing. You see, we all thought that what was missing was linguistic input, like the case of Jeannie or the feral child. But in fact, what was missing were interactions with human community. If they had interactions with human community, I would guess that they would have developed something like the Sena and other home signs.
Mm-hmm. So the interaction in that case started too late. That's the point, right?
Correct. Correct. Mm-hmm. Yes, it was beyond the critical period.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Ekaterina Baklanova.
Thank you.
Please, yes.
Thank you, Dr. Miyagawa, for a very insightful lecture. Could you please repeat, maybe I just missed it, the C system? What stands for C here, the abbreviation?
I should have been more, yeah, thank you. So the C system is a CP. Yeah, that's what I meant. I say C system because it's an extended CP, like Luigi Rizzi's system. So you have the CP, but on top of that, you have extensions like topicalization, judgment phrase, and so forth, but all within the propositional component.
Thank you.
And everything pretty much contributing truth conditional elements. So that's the human thought part, the CP system. Yeah, you can think of it as CP system.
Okay, Arkady Shradlov.
Yeah, thank you for the talk. Could you please repeat the repeat how the case of home science proves the existence of SAP? I believe that's your point, right?
Yes, yes, absolutely, absolutely. So the basic observation about home signs is there are two of them. Okay, if you keep this in mind, you understand the important points. One, home signs have essential properties of human language. Okay? They are not some random pantomime, as some people have suggested. It's human language. You know, it's got all the properties that you're familiar with for human language. That's one. Second, there was no linguistic input whatsoever for these kids to have acquired the home sign. Okay? Because they are born into homes with hearing parents who did not have, who did not know sign language. And kids, of course, could not hear any spoken language. So there was no input. And yet, quite amazingly, they acquired or made up, if you like, a system that is human language. And so coming to your question, how does that give evidence for the SAP? What we believe happened, this goes back to the first question, is that the parents, although they were not giving the child linguistic input, they couldn't. They didn't know sign language. They were interacting with the child desperately. Mother wants to interact with her child. And so they were interacting. And that interaction was the speaker addressee. Okay? It activated the speaker addressee component of syntax. And that interaction in turn activated this entire system. Just by activating the SAP, it activated this entire system, including the CP system, which gives you all of those properties of human language, like recursion and compositionality. But the starting point is the SAP, which was available to the child by way of interacting with the parents.
May I follow up, please? But if we believe that there are some universal grammar tools innate, then I suppose a language could be developed without any stimuli from SAP, just like by itself, if there is enough reason for it to be developed, which those children had, as opposed to the feral children, which did not.
Then the question is, why didn't Jeannie, the very unfortunate child who was isolated until the age of 13, why didn't she develop something on her own?
Well, because she didn't have a reason, to communicate.
Right. And so I think we're talking about the same thing. The reason is interaction. Right. You want a language because you need to interact.
But how does it prove it's in the tree?
And that interaction is made possible by the SAP, which anchors this whole system in the conversational context. That's available to these kids, even though they don't have linguistic input. Without it, you're just stuck with a C system, and there's no way for you to interact with the conversational context. And so even if you do have an opportunity to interact, there is nothing to trigger the CP system. That's my suggestion.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. We have two more questions. Shigeru, can we afford two more questions?
Oh yes, I have time. If you have time,
perfect.
I have plenty of time.
Okay, perfect. So Irina Mikhailовna Kobzeva, then Daniel Burov.
Thank you very much for your talk. My first question is very simple. What is the intermediate phrase, commit P?
Thank you for the question. So you have the speaker addressee phrase at the top, and then you have which is represents speaker and addressee, the conversational members, and then you have the CP system. You need something to connect the speaker addressee to the CP system. Okay? Otherwise, the speaker and addressee are just hanging out there, and there's no logical connection between the two. And in the earlier version, Hodge Ross, in his 19 70 article suggested that you have performative verbs like declare. Right? The speaker declares to the addressee, and then the sentence, Peter worked. But it was pointed out right away that that is a problem from truth conditional point of view, because Peter worked, and I declare to you Peter worked, which for Hajras or the same thing, in fact, have different truth conditions. And so that was set aside. But now you need something to link speak addressee to the proposition. And so this commit P was proposed by Krifka based on tradition, Frege's tradition of public commitment. So an assertion is the following: speaker commits to the addressee the truthfulness of the proposition. And so that's the commitment phrase. A promise is where the speaker commits to the addressee that the addressee, promise, like I promise you that I will cook tonight. I am committing as a speaker to you, the addressee, that I will bring about P. A request, like please open the window, is I am committing to you that you will bring about P. So these kinds of public commitments is what links the speaker addressee to the proposition. And by adopting the Frege type of public commitment as opposed to the Austin type of speech acts, you're able to avoid the truth condition problem that was pointed out for Ross's analysis.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is Danya Burov. Yeah.
Thank you very much for the interesting talk. My question concerns the SAP phrase. Like, they were examples of languages that exhibit agreement with the speaker and languages that exhibit the agreement with the addressee. Do we know any examples of languages where both are present, like where there are both agreement with the addressee and with the speaker in one way or another?
In one sentence.
Yes. Or just a language where where both are present. Yes.
Maybe separately. Yeah. So Romanian is the latter example where the sentential particle high can agree with the speaker, as you saw, but in other usages, it can agree with the addressee. Okay. But you don't have both because you only allowed one particle. There are cases where you see both, but it's not agreement, and it's not so surprising. You don't, it's often the case that you don't get double agreement in a sentence. Sometimes you do, like Basque, but there are cases where you have an allocutive agreement plus something else that indicates that there's a speaker projection. These are sentential particles that you find in Japanese.
And so if it's not agreement, what are the other ways that indicate this, like this presence of, like, what are the major types of entities that indicate the presence of this higher projections?
Good. In answering this question, one thing I should have mentioned this. I know that many of you look at lots of languages, and I am hoping that some of you might, pick up on this and see if there are there's evidence in the languages that you work with for allocutive agreement or speaker. So in my 2022 monograph, I talk about sentential particles in Japanese that occur right at the end of the sentence, right at the end. And you know, like yo and zo and so, and they have this kind of emotional feel to them, and they clearly occur very high in the structure. And I argue either at the speaker head, the addressee head, or there's one that occurs on the commitment head as well. If you're interested, I can send you the new LI piece that Virginia Hill and I worked up to give syntactic motivation for the commitment phrase. I'll send that to Sergey, and he can distribute it to people who are interested.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shigeru. There have been two questions in the chat for a while. So one is, if we assume that the derivation always goes upwards, how may we explain the activation of the lower C system by the presence of the higher SAP system in home sign cases?
I missed the last part, the SAP.
So the question is, if we assume that the derivation goes upwards, how would we explain the activation of the lower C system by the presence of the higher SAP system in home sign case?
In home signs. That's an interesting question. One that I have not thought about. My idea is that you know, before you start doing any kind of derivation, you need to first get this whole system up and running. And the way that it's done in the home sign system is that the SAP, okay, which is available to young people, SAP triggers the activation of this entire system. And once it's up and running, then you can have these upward derivations. But the basic requirement is that first and foremost, you got to get this whole system up and running before you can begin to do derivations.
Thank you. And another question is there any data about the age when deaf people make up, so to say, acquire the sign language?
Can you ask that question again? I'm sorry, I missed that.
Is there any data about the age when deaf people make up and acquire the sign language?
Yeah. So we are looking at that right now, and we can in fact study this quite incisively because we have clear documentation. There appears to be suggestive data that they take a little longer to create the home signs. And it's sort of understandable because they actually have to create it themselves. They're not given, you know, all of the input that we get as hearing infants. And so I think they start out a little bit later. I know that we had the date. I don't quite have the right. I don't have that information with me. But everything occurs within the critical period, but maybe a little bit later.
Okay, all right. Now we have a question from Nikolai. Sorry, I don't know your full name. Nikolai, are you here?
Yes, I'm here. Presentation のありがとうございました。Sorry, in English, but may I ask you in Japanese?
Okay.
質問が一つあります。これについてどんな論文を読めますか？どうぞもう一回言ってもらえないでしょうか？先生の論文はどんな名前を持っていますか？
はい。So Nikolai asked what references should he read. And for the benefit of everyone, let me answer in English. I based much of this work on my 2022 LI monograph, Syntax in the Treetops from MIT Press. And by the way, that monograph is now free to be downloaded from the MIT Press site, as well as my 2017 LI monograph and my 2010 LI monograph. And they're all free to be downloaded. The article where I first argued for allocutive agreement as regular agreement based on Oyasabal's work is my 2012 article that appeared in a volume on this topic. 2012, it's in the bibliography. Agreements that occur mainly in the main clause. That's the title of the article. Agreements that occur mainly in the main clause. That's 2012. はい、どうもありがとう、ニコライ。
どうもありがとうございました。Thanks a lot.
All right. We still have two more questions. Shigeru, is that okay if we go on?
Sure, absolutely. Oh, these are wonderful questions, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you. Stepan Kalin, please.
Thank you for your inspiring talk, Professor Miyagawa. And my question is it's known that that many artificial languages share also the features of the parameters that characterize the natural languages. Let's look at the Esperanto language. We can find both recursion and displacement and compositionality and so on there. What do you think? What is the main difference, the basic difference between artificial languages and the natural human languages? Or might the notion of artificial language and the notion of natural language not be relevant at all? Thank you.
Oh, that's a very interesting point. You're right. I mean, I don't know Esperanto, but I'm sure that you're right about that. You know, Esperanto is it's artificial, but it is based on human language, right? Bits and pieces of human language. It wasn't created from complete scratch. So it's not surprising that it has the essential properties of human language because it drew from human language. It just happens to not have a national identity like Russian or Japanese or English. So that part's not surprising. I thought that you were going to talk about computer language, which has recursion. I don't know if it has displacement. I don't know if it has compositionality, but it does have recursion for sure. You may find bits and pieces of these things. But what's striking about home science is that these kids, 2-3-year-old kids, on their own created the system with these properties out of the blue, without any input, without any input that has those properties. That's the striking thing about these home science. And they just happen to mirror the essential properties of human language. This is what we're focused on.
Thank you. So what looks like the last question we have, and here it is. I'm interested in some details about Sina. If I have heard that correctly, it has 34 or 44 speakers among deaf signers and their families. Do we postulate that it's a monolithic language with unified grammar? I just don't get how that is possible, that those signers have little or no linguistic input, but it has to be shared between Sina speakers. So as far as I can tell, that's the question about, how other speakers of Sina acquired it and how was it possible?
when I first encountered this, I had exactly the same sort of doubt that these speakers could have acquired, or the Sena was created without any input. But the good thing about Sena is, as I said, it has full documentation from the very first speaker on, and it was created without any input, linguistic input. This is true with Nicaraguan home sign. It's true with the home sign studied in Israel. Okay. This is the amazing thing. You know, we're so used to thinking that you have to have linguistic input to acquire a language, but that's just not true. It's absolutely not true. It certainly helps, but it's not necessary to trigger this system that you see here. Okay. There are sort of three stages to sign language. One is home sign, which are these homemade signs with essential properties of human language, made up by individuals. There's what's called emergent sign language, where these home signers are brought together and they begin to sign to each other, and they say, oh, I can understand what you're, and then they begin to create a unified system. And then ultimately that leads to a full-fledged sign language. Okay. So in today's community of 30-some signers, it is more closely resembling an emergent sign language because they are communicating with each other. Okay. But what's important is that we have documentation from the very first home signer, Sena signer, and we know that the home signs being used today are basically the same as the signs that were created by the first home signer. And so in studying today's Sena signers, we can be reasonably confident that we are looking at a system that was created without any linguistic input.
Okay, thank you so much, Shigero. I think there are no further questions. So on behalf of my colleagues, I'd like to thank you for being here with us tonight. Well, it's still morning in Boston, and it was an honor and pleasure to have you here. Thank you so very much, and we'll be happy to have you again some other time. Thank you, Shigeru.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
so much.
everyone for being here and participating in the discussion. So this was our November linguistic colloquium. Stay tuned and return to our next colloquium in December. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Shigeru, once again. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much.